James. Just a little disclaimer, this is the first time I've done a video tutorial, so I'm going to try and make this as simple and as clear as possible. I'll try and go through it quite slowly and explain what I'm doing and what I'm pressing on the keyboard at the same time. So before we start, we're going to open up the template. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to supply you with a little folder like this with the master template in, and what I want you to do is just open that up first. Now, to make it super easy so you can follow exactly what I'm doing on screen, I've set up a little preset for the toolbars in Photoshop, and I'm just going to quickly show you how to add those in so that what you see on screen is going to be exactly what you see when I'm working on this as well. So first off, when it opens up, just like you go to Edit and go down to Presets and Export Import Presets, and this window will come up, and what I'd like you to do is just go to Select Import Folder, and this will be the same folder that I've supplied you. So I'll just go back a step from the beginning because I've got it on the desktop. So we've got the folder here, exported presets, workspaces, and just double click on these, and it won't let you actually select the preset, but if you just go down to open, now what you need to do is simply just click on it here so it highlights, and then click the right arrow here, and it'll pop over saying presets to import, and then just hit import all presets. You'll get a little window here and just click OK. So nothing changes immediately. So what I just need you to do is go up to the little workspaces icon up here, and at the top will be the one that I've set up. Now click on that, and so the window will just kind of reset to this setup, and that'll make it easier for you to access the tools that we're going to be using most commonly on this tutorial. So little introduction to the template that I've set up. So at the moment there's nothing in it, which is fine because we're going to be adding our own images in there. But if you go down to the layers panel, what I've done is there's 3 folders of layers which we're going to be using. Now, these are separated by 2 red layers. Now, we're not going to be using these red layers. They're simply just to separate out the layers that we're going to be using, just as a visual thing, so we can see what we're doing nice and clearly. So I've separated them out into a base layer image, a muscles layer, and a nerve layer. Now, we'll click the little twizzly here, that expands the group. And as you can see here, we've got an empty layer with the layer mask already attached, and that's called the base image. And then under muscles, we've got a muscle image layer here with the layer mask attached. And we've also got a muscles layer that we can use for painting on. And I've put a little note there, paint nerves here, and that would be on this layer mask. Now, as we've discussed previously, this is a layer mask, black being on, black meaning off, white meaning on. We can't see that this layer is pink at the moment, but if I was to get the paint bucket over here, again, some of these tools will be hidden, so we'll try and find those. You have your paint bucket here, so you just click and hold on the tool, and there's your paint bucket tool, or the shortcut, keyboard shortcut, there's G. And now it's black, so we want to switch that on. So that's white in the palette here, and we make that white so that layer becomes visible, all switched on. So you can see the pink layer that we've got there now. Now I'm going to change that back because we don't want to see that at the moment. I'm just showing you that that's there for when we come to use it. And then at the top here we've got the nerve layer. Again, clicking that little arrow exposes the layer. And we've got the paint nerves here, and that's yellow, and that's currently switched off as well. So there's all the layers set up ready to use. Now, there's going to be a specific way that you need to open up your images into this template, and how we're going to do that is we'll start with the base layer image. Now, what these are set up as smart objects. Now, how they work is that it's a layer linked to a separate document, and that will become clear when I go through the steps how that works. But all you need to do is just click once on the empty layer, so it's highlighted, and then you can either double click, and that will bring up this option. Now what this means is that this is opening up this layer in a separate window. And once you've made the changes to that layer, they will then carry through back to the core template. So I'm going to click OK on that. And it looks like nothing's changed, but it's actually opened up a separate document in this window here. So you've got your master template here, and then you've got your layer 11. So just how we access that again, I'm just going to close that for now. You either double click on it, or you can right click on that layer, and then you can select edit contents. And that's done the same thing again. That's brought this layer out into a separate document. So what we can do now, in this separate document, we can start adding the images that we want to work on. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to File, and we're going to go Place Linked. And what this will do, it'll open up a new window here. And I'm just going to change the view so I can see what's going on. Now, you want to go back to the folder that I've given you. So on the desktop, I've got the folder. And I'm going to open up this skin PNG. Now, I've just used these just for demonstration purposes. But what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to make this the full size of the frame. And I expanded that by holding the Shift key and on one of these corner arrows, and that scales it up proportionally. Alternatively, you can enter in manual values here for the scale. And then once you're okay with that, just click, yep, we're okay with that, on the tick there. Now, to make this apply back to the template, you just have to click Save. Now, what that does is it kind of saves a working copy. Now, you don't need to select a location or anything, you just hit Save. Now, that's saved this layer. Now, when I close it, what it's done is that it's now pulled that through to the template. So, the cool thing about that is that it's an easy way to update these layers to keep it all separate. So what we can now do is that we can scale this again to a different size, or say for this example, we're going to work on the shoulder layer here. So what we're going to do is I want you to imagine that your image is just the shoulder size. So I'm going to go up to Edit and Free Transform. So that will bring up this bounding box again. Now I'm just going to zoom out a little. I can do that. That's cancelled out the Free Transform, but I'm just clicking the magnifying glass. Or you can just hit Z on the keyboard. And you can either select the negative arrow to zoom out, or the positive arrow to zoom in. But alternatively, by holding Alt or Option on your keyboard, that will toggle between the two of these. So I'm just going to press the Alt key and zoom out a little bit. Now, with that layer selected, I'm going to go back up to Edit, Free Transform, and I'm just going to scale it up just so we can see that shoulder section. Okay. There we go. So that's good. So this layer also has a layer mask attached. So what you would use that for is that, for example, if this image had a blue background that we didn't want in there, you could then use that layer mask with it selected. So just clicking and selecting there, and then selecting your brush tool up here. I'm just going to click off smoothing because we don't want that. With that layer mask selected, it's on white, so everything's being shown. That layer is on. I'm going to select black, which is already selected, and this is where you can rub out parts of that layer you wouldn't want to see. So hypothetically, if this image did have that blue background, you could just paint out that background and get that to how you'd want it. Alternatively, using the quick selection tool that I showed you last time, if that whole section was blue, you could go up to your quick selection tool up here, and you have to click back actually on the layer and not the layer mask. It won't work if it's on the layer mask. Clicking back on the layer, you can use the quick selection tool to make that selection of areas that you wouldn't want, and remembering that you can refine that edge. Now it is adding, see we've got the little plus symbol there. It's, as long as you keep using this tool, it's going to add to the mask. Alternatively, you can select the minus, which would then minus back out of that selection to refine that edge. Or just a keyboard shortcut is that you can again use the option key to toggle between the plus and the minus. So you can see that you've got the plus, which is adding, and then your minus, which is removing. So once you've made that selection, I'm just going to quickly make that selection. Well, just so you can see just so you can see for the point of this tutorial, I'm going to. It's just having a bit of think. I'm just going to cancel out that. I'm just going to go to select, deselect, then bringing up the wand again. Say, for example, we didn't want to see this guy's face. I've just made that selection there. Going back down to your layer panel and clicking on the layer mask, and then selecting our paintbrush. Now it's black because we want to switch it off. On that layer mask, with it selected, you would just paint away that selection. So that's what you would do if you had a coloured background that you wanted to remove. So we've got our underlying layer in there. I'm actually just going to make it a little bit bigger. I've just pressed Z for the zoom and option key to zoom out. I'm going to go edit, free transform. I'm just going to make that shoulder section a bit bigger. And then I'm going to click OK. So now we've got our base image layer on now. Once you've removed the background, if it has a background from the base image, you shouldn't need to use this again. Next we would go on to our muscle layer, excuse me. So going on to your muscle layer, so I've set up two options here. You've got you can add a muscle image, like a similar way we've done a background image, or you can paint your muscles in depending on the image. So zooming back in again, by selecting your layer mask on the pink layer, with that selected, you can go back to your brush tool, and because it's black, it's off. So if we paint black onto that layer mask, it's not going to do anything. However, switching that to white by clicking on that little reverse arrow, we can start to see the pink. So using your brush settings, I'm just going to soften that off a little bit and reduce the size. You can start to paint in your muscles if you wanted to do that directly. One thing to note, I'm just clicking undo here. On your shape dynamics, this is where how much sensitivity is used with your tablet. So the size jitter basically means how much the shape of the the size of the brush will change with how much pressure you do on the pad. So it's currently set to pen pressure. No, ignore exactly what I've just said. I apologise. You want, I think it just needs to be made sure that it's set to pen pressure. Yep. As long as it's set to pen pressure, if you press really lightly, you get the very fine lines, or the more pressure you press, you get the bigger shapes. So you get that nice kind of drawing style. Anyway, so I'm just hitting undo, or alternatively going back in the history panel here, back to where we were last there. So just a quick recap. If you wanted to paint your muscles in manually, you use the muscles layer here, clicking on the layer mask. As it's black, you want to be painting with white to reveal it. Making sure your pen pressure's selected under shape dynamics. You go back to brush tip shape. You select how hard the edge of the brush wants to be, and you can see that kind of change here. And you probably want it depends on how you want the muscles to appear. I'd imagine you want them quite defined, the edges. And then you can change the sorry. Oops, daisy. Sorry, scratch that. You can set the size of your brush just by toggling the scale here. And then going back, making sure that that layer mask is selected. You've got your brush selected and that the white layer selected. Sorry, the white color is selected. You can then paint in those muscles. Okay. So I'm just going to undo those. So alternatively, if you wanted to add in a muscle image to how we did the base image layer, you want to select the muscle image here layer and double clicking on that. That opens up this layer in a new document. And same as before, we go File, Place Linked, and then I'm going to select my muscle, place that in, and then holding Shift, I'm going to bring that up proportionally in size, and I'm quite happy with that now, and I'm just going to click the tick to confirm the changes. And then we go File and Save, which will carry the changes over to the template. We can now close this, and we can see that the muscles have now been brought through to that layer. Cool, so now we want to scale this so that it overlays the skin layer nicely. So I'm going to just zoom out to start with. I'm going to press Z on the keyboard for zoom. I'm going to hit the Option key so I get the option to zoom out when I click. Now I'm ready to transform this. Now if I was to go Edit, Free Transform, I can hold Shift and scale that up like we would normally. However, it becomes a little bit tricky because I can't quite see where it's going to sit. I know it's a bit obvious because this is already outlined, but for argument's sake, I just hit Escape to reset that. I'm just going to drop the opacity of this layer over here. So by selecting that layer, I can drop the opacity, and that just means that you can see through to the layer underneath when you start to scale it, so you know that what you have is in the right position. So zooming out again, I'm going to go Edit, Free Transform, holding Shift to scale it proportionally. I'm going to drag that up, and I'm just going to drag and move it until we get to roughly what I'm after. We're getting pretty close. I think it's just a bit bigger. That might look like it's a little bit too big, but I think that's pretty close to what I'm after here. So I'm going to commit those changes by clicking the tick arrow. And then this layer is still selected. If it wasn't, I would just click on it. I'm going to bring that opacity back up to 100% so it becomes opaque over the skin layer below. Now, this is just an illustration, just to show this. I'm going to imagine we want this shoulder and a little bit of this neck muscle here, but I don't want any of this other stuff here. So we can get rid of that by using the layer mask again. So currently the actual layer with the muscles on is selected. We just want the layer mask, so we just click on the layer mask. We go back over to our brush tool, and because it's white and we've got white selected, that's not going to do anything because everything on that layer is visible. We're just going to click the arrow to reverse that, and using black, I'm just going to start painting out the layer we don't want. So I'm just going to soften this up a little bit, but again, it's up to your discretion how soft you'd like this brush. So I'm going to go around this curve here. And now I'm not expecting it to be perfect straight away, but we'll tidy that up in a second. I'm just going to get rid of the bulk of this size. I'm just going to make my brush a bit bigger to do that. So we've got rid of most of that. We'll just have a little bit of the neck there, just for argument's sake. So I'm going to do some deliberate things wrong. Excuse me a moment. Sorry, I'm just going to do a couple of deliberate things wrong just to show you how you would tidy this up, and a couple of ways we can do that. So I'm going to pretend that I took a big chunk out of here, which I didn't want, and I'm going to clear up this side, but I'm going to do that in a specific way. So one of the great things about the tablet is that it is intuitive, like you would be drawing with a pen and paper. However, the one thing you can't really do with it is you can't turn around a bit of paper like you would if you were drawing something normally. So trying to say, for example, doing this curve might feel quite unnatural. So how we can do that to make it feel a bit better is change the angle of how this page is set up. Now this is really easy. All you need to do is press R on the keyboard, and that brings up a rotate angle. Now what this does, you get this icon up here. If you click and hold and drag left and right, this changes the angle of the canvas. It doesn't change the angle of the physical artwork because it's still a square, but you can rotate the artwork so that it becomes a little bit more natural for drawing these curves. And then to undo that, to put it back to normal, you just hit reset view. So to do that again, you just press R on the keyboard, brings up, here we go, press R, brings up this tool, and just click and hold and drag left and right to change that angle. And then you just let go. I then just reselect my brush again. And now it feels a bit more natural to draw those kind of curves. Moving this, I'm going to press R again to rotate this background. And let go, press brush tool again. So brush just there, or B for brush. However, I've taken a big chunk out, which I didn't want to do, and using black is only taking more out of that layer. So I want to paint that back in. So we want a white brush. So we just hit the Twizzly just to make that back to white. And then we can paint back in what we wanted. And we can smooth that off. Oops, I've accidentally done a little bit too much there. So going back to black, and we can just paint that out. Cool. So we've got the layer mask going, which is great. We've got the muscle that we want. So I just want to reset the view. So we can do that by pressing R to bring up the rotate view and just hit reset view. So we've got our muscles, which are looking pretty good. Now, I just want to go, if you wanted to then paint your muscles on top of that, not saying you would because you've already put a layer in there, you would just click back onto the muscles layer, clicking onto the layer mask, and we go to brush, and because this layer is black, the layer mask is black, which means nothing is visible, we need to use a white brush, and then you could paint over your muscles. Now, that's looking pretty, well, not great, because the way how it's appearing over the underlying muscle there. So how we change that is we click back onto the active layer where the pink is, and it's currently set to multiply. We can put that to normal. Sorry, back to normal. And now that appears as an opaque layer over everything. You could just toggle the opacity to get that to overlay, and that you begin to see the underlying layers. So you could get that to a point that you want it. Or alternatively, you could try the different options here to see how the different layers interact to give you your best effect. I'm just going to put that back to normal. Now, on any of these layer masks, I could decide, like, I've painted this muscle on the top, and it's like, well, actually, I don't want to paint that on there, or the layer mask is incorrect. I could have, excuse me, going back to that layer mask, I could have accidentally done this, which we obviously don't want. You could either take the time to paint it back out by using black. Alternatively, you could just delete the layer mask. So with the layer mask selected, you just click and drag it down to the bin. And it's like, would you like to apply the layer mask before removing? I don't, so I'm just going to hit delete. So that reverts the layer back to a standard layer without a layer mask. And to add a new one, you just have it selected. Click on the layer mask icon here, and it's white, which means it's showing everything. So we want to turn it off. So we want to make that layer mask black. So by clicking on the paint bucket tool, we've got black selected, which is okay, and we just drop that on, and that just hides that pink layer again. So what that does, that just allows us to start afresh with a new layer mask. Cool. So that's the muscles layer. Once that's all set up and looking pretty good, you can then go onto your nerve layer. So same principle as the pink muscles layer. You've got your yellow nerve layer here. So we click on that. Now to start drawing on the nerves, we want to click on the layer mask. We want our brush tool, so B for brush, or just up here, brush tool. And this layer's off because it's black, so by painting black on it, it will do nothing. We want to select white, and with white selected and the layer mask selected, we can start drawing in those nerves. So obviously that's too big. The nerves you want to perhaps show are being a little bit more delicate, so I'm just going to go back a step. I'm going to change my brush size, bring that down, and you can just start drawing in those nerves. Now, it can be a little bit wobbly because the tablets are very sensitive. I'm going to just undo that by clicking those back, So the way you can do that is you could zoom in a little bit closer, pressing Z for zoom and then clicking the brush tool again with that layer mask selected there. Being a bit closer often lets you just do a few smoother strokes. So what I've just done, I'm moving around the canvas, and now I've got the hand tool up. So to do that while you zoomed in, obviously because you can't see this section up here, you can go down to this and hold it here. And so there's that rotate view tool which we did previously, but there's also the hand tool. And the shortcut for that is H, or alternatively you can just press and hold spacebar on the keyboard and then click and drag yourself around the image. So I'm going to drag myself up here. I just want to rotate it because I want to get that curve, which I'm not too comfortable doing from this angle. So we press R on the keyboard for rotate view and click and drag it round. And then pressing brush again, and we're still on that layer mask, which is perfect. And then I can just add that nerve back in. And if you continue painting over it, you can somewhat kind of sculpt the thickness of that nerve. So I want to finish up the other side, so pressing spacebar, bringing up the hand tool, coming back over here. This angle's not great, so I'm just going to press R to rotate and click round. H or spacebar to bring the hand tool up again. And I'm going to paint in this section, so B for brush or brush tool. And I'm just going to add that nerve in. Now that's not ideal there. For example, I'll make that worse just so we can see. I've done that. I didn't want to do that. So you can, with your layer mask selected, switch back to black, and you can just paint that bad section back out. Now I'm just going to reset that view. So by pressing R, bring up the rotate view tool, reset view. So I've got a complete nerve now. So just to zoom back out, Z for zoom, Alt to zoom out and click. Perfect. And now the layer mask is still selected. B for brush, or click up there. I'm just going to, I made a mistake. The reason that happened was because I've still got black selected, so it's taking away from what we've done. So I just go back a step, switch that back to white, and then I'm just going to draw some nerves on, like so. So that is roughly how the template works. So now we want to save it. So I'm happy with what I've done. I may want to come back and edit this later. So what we need to make sure is we want to make sure we save this as a excuse me, as a Photoshop file, and that will retain all the layers and leave it all editable. So to do that, we just go File, and then save as. Because if we hit just save, that will save over the top of the master template, and we don't want to do that. We want to keep the master template free from drawings and just simply use it as a template. So I'm just going to call this shoulder V1, and then hit save, and it will just say, this dialog window will come up and you just click OK. So now that's just saving down here. It will take a little bit of a while to do because it's a high-res file. So that's saved. Perfect. And now I can, for example, for argument's sake, I'm just going to, on the nerve layer, I've done this nerve, which is a racetrack nerve, which I don't want. I'm just going to hit save, because now it's the shoulder document no longer. It's the shoulder document no longer the template that we're working on. Hit save, and then once this is saved, I'm just going to close that. And so in Photoshop, it shows the old documents that you've just recently worked on. So you can either click on that to open it, you can click open here, or you can go File and Open. Oh, no, sorry, I went to the wrong one. File, Open, and then I'm going to open that shoulder just by double clicking on that or clicking Open. Sorry, ignore that. So that's going to open the Photoshop file. And so we've still got all the layers. Now I realise that I no longer want this nerve, but because we've saved it as a Photoshop file, we've got all those layers that we can work back into. So I'm just going to click back on that layer mask, click the brush tool, and white reveals more of that layer, which we don't want. So we want it black. And we can just paint back out the layers that we can paint back out the sections that we don't want. Like so. Cool, so I'm happy with that. Now I'm just going to resave the Photoshop file, or what you could do, so just to be extra safe when you're working so you don't lose your progress, you can hit Save As. And I'm going to save this as version 2. And that means it will keep the first version. And in case we did want that racetrack nerve, but no, I'm pretty happy with version 2. So I'm perhaps ready to consider this a final illustration. So when this comes to doing your book, you don't want to supply layered Photoshop files because they're really quite large. So if this was a final image and we're happy with that, we want to compress all these layers. Now there's 2 ways you can do this. You can go to Layer and you can hit Flatten Image. And what that basically does, that just sandwiches all of these layers together. And that makes a completely flat image. And what it also does is it removes all the transparency from the layers. So you've now got this single layer that has all the information with a background. So that's fine if you want a white background. Alternatively, if we go Edit, Undo, Flatten Image, we can go Layer and Merge Visible. Now Merge Visible is a little bit different. That simply merges all the layers which are not so ironically visible. And what that means is that if there is layers with transparency, it will keep that transparency. So it's merged everything down to a single layer, but still retain that transparency, which means if it was in a book and, for example, the background color of your book on that page was red, then the red would show through underneath the image. So that might be quite desirable. So to save a transparent image, you would need to go File, Save As, and I would advise probably keep creating a new folder and call this Final Drawings, hit Create, and now I'm just going to rename this shoulder FA for Final Art. You could save it as a Photoshop file. You could also save it as a TIFF. A TIFF is basically a completely uncompressed image. So that would be the highest quality that you'd want for printing. So I'm just going to then click Save. Now you're going to get a confusing dialog box, and I'm not going to lie to you, I don't really know what all of these mean. All I just make sure is that it keeps the standard settings, and then image compression is set to none. And then we just hit OK. And it's going to say including layers will increase file size. That's fine. We click OK, and that's going to save that. So that would be considered a final image. Cool. So I'm just going to close this now. Alternatively, if it lets me close it, there we go. Alternatively, you might decide that actually that was fine, but I didn't want it square. The reason I've set the document up as square is so you can do both portrait and landscape and then crop the images. So I'm going to go back to shoulder version 2, and I might decide that I want this to be a portrait image. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and then go to my crop tool, which is just this one here, or C for crop. Now, using the crop tool, I can just click and hold and drag the section of the image I want to see, or that I want. What you now see here is a little bit confusing, but what's happened is that with the crop tool, it's actually showing the rest of the image that's available. So if you recall, we painted out sections, and using the smart object images, we scaled that image quite large. This is just showing what was actually left around that image, but for this, I'm just going to concentrate on the section that I want. And I just want this section here, so just clicking on the side of the crop frame, I can drag those proportions. You might decide you want to expand both horizontally and vertically at the same time, which you can. Or if you decided that you've got a ratio, say that ratio is that what you like there, holding shift on the corner does that proportionally. But for argument's sake, I'm just going to select that. Once that's selected, I'm going to click OK. We have got an option here that says delete crop pixels, and what that does is we leave that ticked. Everything else around what we've selected will then be deleted from the image, which is fine as long as you're happy with how the final illustration looks and you're not going to make any other alterations to it. So I'm just going to click OK on that crop, and that's going to do its thing. Cool, so we've got the final section of the image we want. So we just want to flatten those layers, so I'm just going to go layer, flatten, merge visible. That's flattened everything, and now we just simply go File, Save As. I'm going to go Final Drawings. I'm going to, for argument's sake, just call this FA2. Oh, sorry, that I didn't select TIFF. I'm just going to cancel that. I'm going to go File, Save As, and then select TIFF from the drop-down, and then shoulder FA2, and then hit Save. Then we're going to get that. That's all fine, making sure that's on none. We click OK. The warning, that's fine, we just click OK. And then that's changed it to the TIFF. And that would be a final created image. So hopefully that will help guide you through how to create these images. If you do have any issues, obviously feel free to get back in contact, but I hope that was relatively straightforward. It should be a relatively stress-free way of creating the illustrations without having to set layers up each time. One last thing I will just cover, hypothetically, if you wanted to change the colours of your nerves, for example, I'm just going to go back to shoulder version 2, the Photoshop file where it's still, the nerve's still active. And that will just open. So, for example, say we didn't want the nerves to be yellow. All you do simply is make sure you have the coloured layer selected, not the layer mask. So I have that selected. Clicking on your colours, you can either do it through that way, or you can come up to the colour palette here. For example, say we decided we wanted the nerves to be blue. We can just select that blue, and that's changed over here. Now with the paint bucket tool on that layer there, we can just simply click and drop, and that will change the colour. And that's the same for the muscles. And then while we're talking about changing colours and the opacity, you could drop the opacity of that layer if you wanted to see more of what's underneath. Or alternatively, you can select the blending layer options to change how you want those to appear over the top of those layers. And that's how you change that colour. But as I said, if you do have any issues, please feel free to get in contact. I hope this was helpful.